what if I told you the Dark Elves weren't always dark? Their ashen skin and burning eyes, a curse from a goddess scorned. Hello everyone, Kai Reviews here. Today, we are diving deep into what made the Dwemer. All of the elf folk have quite a bit of history, but I find the Dark Elves one of the more interesting tales. I'm going to be discussing the in-universe lore books and conversations for this, mostly written by the characters themselves, and not a meta thread of information. This will add a perspective I feel other sources are missing. Also, sorry if I mispronounce all of the names here. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Okay, well, let's go. We are going to start with the Battle of the Red Mountain. Now, there is a lot of preluding up to this battle, but the important thing to note is the God King Vivek is the one recounting this battle. And during this battle, he was not exactly a God King. The Dark Elves were also not Dark Elves at this point, but a group who broke away from the High Elves and called themselves the Chimer. So in the words of Vivek, he says, "Who can clearly recall the events of the distant past, but you have asked me to tell you, in my own words, the events surrounding the Battle of Red Mountain, the birth of the Tribunal, and the prophecies of a Nerevar reborn. Here is what I can tell you. When the Chimer first abandoned the herds and tents of their nomadic ancestors and built the first great houses, we loved the Daedra and worshipped them as gods. But our brethren, the Dwemer, scorned the Daedra and mocked our foolish rituals, and preferred instead their gods of reason and logic. So the Chimer and the Dwemer were always at bitter war, until the Nords came and invaded Resdain. Only then did the Chimer and Dwemer put away their strife and join together to cast out the invaders. Once the Nords were driven out, General Nerevar of the Chimer and General Dumak of the Dwemer, who had come to love and respect one another, resolved to make peace between their peoples. In that time, I was but a junior consular to Nerevar, and Nerevar's queen, Almalexia, and his other favorite consular, Sotha Sil, always doubted that such peace might long survive, given the bitter disputes between Chimer and Dwemer. But by negotiation and compromise, Nerevar and Dumak somehow managed to preserve a fragile peace. But when Dagoth Lord of House Dagoth, and trusted as a friend by both Nerevar and the Dwemer, brought us proof that High Engineer Kagranak of the Dwemer had discovered the heart of Lorkhan, and that he had learned how to tap its power, and was building a new god, a mockery of Chimer faith and a fearsome weapon, we all urged Nerevar to make war on the dwarves, and to destroy this threat to Chimer beliefs and security. Nerevar was troubled. He went to Dumak and asked if Dagoth said was true, but Kagranak took great offense and asked whom Nerevar thought he was, that he might presume to judge the affairs of the Dwemer. Nerevar was further troubled and made pilgrimage to Halamayan, the sacred temple of Azura, and Azura confirmed that all that Dagoth said was indeed true, and that the creation of a new god of the Dwemer should be prevented at all costs. When Nerevar came back and told us what the goddess had said, we felt our judgments confirmed, and again counseled him to war, chiding Nerevar for his naive trust and friendship, and reminding him of his duty to protect the faith and security of the Chimer against the impiety and dangerous ambitions of the Dwemer. Then Nerevar went back to Vardenfell one last time, hoping that negotiations and compromise might once again preserve the peace. But this time the friends of Nerevar and Dumak quarreled bitterly, and as a result, the Chimer and the Dwemer went to war. The Dwemer were well defended by their fortress at Red Mountain, but Nerevar's cunning drew most of Dumak's armies out into the field and pinned them there, while Nerevar, Dagoth, and a small group of companions could make their way into the heart chamber by secret means. There, Nerevar, the Chimer king, met Dumak, the dwarf king, and they both collapsed from grievous wounds and draining magics. With Dumak fallen and threatened by Dagoth and others, Kagramak turned his tools upon the heart, and Nerevar said he saw Kagranak and all his Dwemer companions at once disappear from the world. In that instant, Dwemer everywhere disappeared without a trace. I will continue Vivek's words in a moment, but I wanted to add some context here. The Dwemer were a people of more science and less magic. This day they all disappeared. No one really knows what happened. Now, there are quite a bit of clues throughout the universe, but for the story of the Chimer, they just vanished. Now, the item that caused this whole war was the heart of Lorkhan in the Red Mountain. Lorkhan was a Daedra who is accredited with talking the divines into, or in some cultures, tricking them into making the world that everyone lives on. In short terms, they found the heart of a god and wanted to make a new god with it, and the old gods were pissed and urged the Chimer to war. Alright, back to Vivek's words. But Kagranak's tools remained, and Dagoth seized them, and he carried them to Nerevar, saying, "That fool Kagranak has destroyed his own people with these things. We should destroy them right away, lest they fall into the wrong hands." But Nerevar was resolved to confer with his queen and his generals, who had foreseen that this war would come and whose counsel he would not ignore again. "I will ask the tribunal what we shall do with them, for they have had wisdom in the past that I had not. Stay here, loyal Dagoth, until I return." So, Nerevar told Dagoth to protect the tools and the heart chamber until he returned. Then Nerevar was carried to us, where we waited on the slopes of Red Mountain, and he told us all that had transpired under Red Mountain. What Nerevar had said was that the Dwemer had used special tools to turn their people into immortals, and that the heart of Lorkhan held wondrous powers. After hearing Nerevar, we gave our counsel as he requested, proposing we should preserve these tools in trust for the welfare of the Chimer people. And who knows, perhaps the Dwemer are not gone forever, but merely transported to some distant realm, from which they may someday return to threaten our security once again. Therefore, we need to keep these tools to study them and their principles, so that we may be safe in future generations. And though Nerevar voiced his grave misgivings, he was willing to be ruled by our council under one condition: that we all together should swear a solemn oath upon Azura that the tools would never be used in the profane manner that the Dwemer had intended. We all readily agreed and swore solemn oaths at Nerevar's dictation. So then, when we went with Nerevar back into Red Mountain and met with Dagoth, Dagoth refused to deliver the tools to us, saying they were dangerous and we could not touch them. Dagoth seemed to be irrational, insisting that only he could be trusted with the tools, and then we guessed that he had somehow been affected by his handling of the tools. But now I feel sure that he had privately learned the powers of the tools, and had in some confused way dictated he must have them for himself. Then Nerevar and his own guard resorted to force to secure the tools. Somehow Dagoth and his retainers escaped, but we gained the tools and delivered them to Sothasil for study and safekeeping. For some years we kept the oaths we swore to Azura with Nerevar, but during that time, in secret, Sothasil must have studied the tools and divined their mysteries. And at last he came to us with the vision of a new world of peace, with justice and honor for nobles, and health and prosperity for the commoners, with the tribunal as immortal patrons and guides. And dedicating ourselves to this vision of a better world, we made a pilgrimage to Red Mountain and transformed ourselves with the power of Kagranak's tools. And no sooner than we had completed our rituals and begun to discover our newfound powers, the Daedra Lord Azura appeared and cursed us for our forsworn oaths. By her powers of prophecy, she assured us that her champion Nerevar, true to his oath, would return to punish us for our perfidy, and to make sure such profane knowledge might never again be used to mock and defy the will of the gods. But Sotha said to her, "The old gods are cruel and arbitrary, and distant from the hopes and fears of Mer. Your age is past. We are the new gods, born of the flesh, and wise and caring of the needs of our people. Spare us your threats and chiding. In constant spirit, we are bold and fresh, and will not fear you." And then, in that moment, all Chimer were changed into Dwemer, and our skins turned ashen and our eyes into fire. Of course, we only knew at that time that this had happened to us, but Azora said, "This is not my act, but your act. You have chosen your fate and the fate of your people, and all the Dwemer shall share your fate. From now to the end of time, you think yourselves gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness." And Azora left us alone in the darkness, and we were all afraid. But we put on brave faces and went forth from Red Mountain to build a new world of our dreams. And the new world we shaped was glorious and generous, and the worship of the Dwemer fervent and grateful. The Dwemer were at first afraid of their new faces, but Sotha spoke to them, saying that this was not a curse, but a blessing, a sign of their changed natures, and sign of the special favor they might enjoy as new Mer, no longer barbarians trembling before ghosts and spirits, but civilized Mer, speaking directly to their immortal friends and patrons, the three faces of the tribunal. And we were all inspired by Sothasil's speech and vision, and took heart. And over time, we crafted the customs and institutions of a just and honorable society, and the land of Resdain knew millennia of peace, equity, and prosperity, unknown to other savage races. But beneath Red Mountain, Dagoth had survived, and even as the light of our new bold world shined ever more brightly, beneath Red Mountain, the darkness gathered, a darkness that was close kin to the bright light that Sothasil coaxed from the heart of Lorkhan with the tools of Kagranak. As the darkness grew, we fought it and crafted walls to confine it, but we never could destroy it, for the source of the darkness was the same source as the source of our own divine inspiration. And in these later days of Morrowind, reduced to a subjugated province of the Western Empire, as the glory of the temple fades and the dark tide rises from Red Mountain, we are reminded of Azora and her promised champion's return. We have waited, blind and in darkness, mere shadows drained of our ardent vision, in shame of our folly, in fear of our judgment, and in hope of our deliverance. We do not know if the outlander claiming to fulfill the prophecies of the Nerevarine is our old companion Nerevar reborn, or a pawn of the Emperor, or a cat's paw of Azora, or some simple twist of fate. But we insist you adhere to the temple doctrine and conform to the strictures dividing the Hieroglypha from the Apocrypha, and that you not speak that which must not be spoken openly. Act as a dutiful priest should, in accordance with your vows of obedience to the canons and archcanons, and all will be forgiven. Defy me, and you will know what it is to stand against a god. That completes the Battle of Red Mountain as told by Vivek. Let's read this from a different point of view. This book is titled Nerevar at Red Mountain. Told by the modern Tribunal Temple, this is the official way the events took place. Resdain, present-day Morrowind, was contested ground between two very different types of Mer, the Chimer, who worshipped Daedra, and the Dwemer, who worshipped a profane and secret power. These two people warred with each other constantly, until their lands were invaded by a young, vibrant, and violent alien culture, the Nords. Two heroes, one from the Chimer and one from the Dwemer, Indoril Nerevar and Dumak Dwarf Orc, made peace between their people and together ousted the alien invaders. Then these two heroes worked long and hard to maintain that peace thereafter, though their counselors thought it could not last, or worse, that it shouldn't last. Nerevar's queen queen and his generals, told him to claim all Resden for his own, but Nerevar would not listen, for he remembered his friendship with Dumak. There would only be peace, until Dagoth arrived. House Dagoth had discovered the source of the profane and secret power of the Dwemer, the legendary heart of Lorkhan, which Dumak's people had used to make themselves immortal and beyond the measure of gods. In fact, one of the high priests, Kagranak, was building a new god so that the Dwemer could claim Resden for their own. Cutting away from the book here, this retelling is putting all of the fault on the Dwemer, who, are not really around anymore to defend themselves. Interesting to see the official report and how much different it is from Vivek's first-hand experience, even though he also left things out. The tribunal urged Nerevar again to make war on the dwarves. Nerevar was troubled. He went to Dumak, his old friend, and asked if what Dagoth said was true, but Kagranak and the high priests of the Dwemer had kept their new god secret from their king, and Dumak said that the Dwemer were innocent of any wrongdoing. Nerevar was troubled again, and made pilgrimage to Halamayan, the sacred temple of Azura, who confirmed that all Dagoth said was indeed true, and that the new god of the Dwemer should be destroyed for the safety of not only Resden, but for the whole world. When Nerevar went back and told his tribunal what the goddess had said, his queen and generals felt themselves proved aright, and again counseled him to war. There were reasons that the Dwemer and the Chimer had hated each other forever. Finally, Nerevar, angered that his friend Dumak would lie to him, went back to Vardenfell. This time, the Chimer king was arrayed in arms and armor, and had his hosts around him, and he spoke harshly to Dumak, Dwarf King, King of Red Mountain. You must give up your worship of the heart of Lorkhan, or I shall forget our friendship and the deeds that were accomplished in its name. And Dumak, who still knew nothing of Kagranak's new god, but proud and protective as ever of his people, said, We shall not relinquish that which has been our way for years beyond reckoning, just as the Chimer will not relinquish their ties to the lords and ladies of Oblivion. And to come at my door in this way, arrayed in arms and armor, and with your hosts around you, tells me you have already forgotten our friendship. Stand down, my sweet Nerevar, or I swear by the 15-1 golden tones, I shall kill you and all your people. And so the Chimer and the Dwemer went to war. The Dwemer were well defended by their fortress at Red Mountain, but the bravery and cleverness of Nerevar's queen and generals drew most of Dumak's armies out into the field and kept them there, so that Nerevar and Dagoth could make their way into the heart chamber by secret means. There, Nerevar met Dumak, and they both fell from grievous wounds. Dagoth slew Kagranak and took the tools the Dwemer used to tap the power of the heart. He went to his dying lord Nerevar and asked him what to do with these tools, and Nerevar summoned Azora again, and she showed them how to use the tools to separate the power of the heart from the Dwemer people. And on the fields, the tribunal and their armies watched as the Dwemer turned into dust all around them as their stolen immortality was taken away. Very interesting here. This version claims they just lost their immortality and faded into dust. The timeline of Nerevar dying doesn't really add up here either. If he died in the cave during battle, how could he still summon Azora and undo the blessing of the Dwemer? I smell shenanigans. Back in Red Mountain, Nerevar told Dagoth to protect the tools and the heart chamber until he returned. Dagoth said, But shouldn't we destroy these tools at once, so that they might never be used for evil again? But Nerevar was confused by his wounds and his sorrow, for he still loved Dumak and the Dwemer people, and so went to the fields outside of Red Mountain to confer with his queen and his his generals, who had foreseen that this war would come, and whose counsel he would not ignore again. I will ask the tribunal, what shall we do with them? For they have had wisdom in the past that I had not. Stay here, loyal Dagoth, until I return. Then Nerevar told his queen and generals all that had transpired under Red Mountain, and how the Dwemer had used special tools to turn their people into immortals, and of the wondrous power of the heart of Lorkhan. The tribunal decided that the Chimer should learn how to use this power, so that Nerevar might claim Resden and the world for their own people. Nerevar did not expect or want this, so he asked his queen and generals to help him summon Azora yet again for her guidance. Dude, no, Nerevar is just alt-spamming at this point. You can't just summon a Daedric prince, but he done it like 4 times now in a week. That tells me Azora really wanted the Dwemer gone. Maybe she even lied. I mean, it would make sense for her to offer her godliness to the Dwemer, and they tell her to shove it because they were not a people of worship. Being a prideful Daedra would definitely put them on her hate list forever. But the tribunal had become as greedy as Kagranak upon hearing of the power of the hearts, and they coveted it. They made ritual as if to summon Azora as Nerevar wanted, but Almexia used poisoned candles, and Sothasil used poisoned robes, and Vivek used poisoned invocations. Nerevar was murdered. Very interesting here. This book tells us both Nerevar was murdered by the tribunal and that he fell in battle due to his wounds alongside his friend Dumak. I was expecting to see this one told by different people, but for such a contradiction to exist just a few pages away tells me the tribunal ain't very good at propaganda. Then Azora came forth anyway and cursed the tribunal for their foul deeds. She told them that she would use her powers over dusk and dawn to make sure Nerevar would come back and make things right again. But the tribunal laughed at her and said that soon they would be gods themselves, and that the Chimer people would forget their old ways of worship. And Azora knew this would be true, and that it might take a long time before her power might bring Nerevar back. What you have done here today is foul beyond a measure, and you will grow to regret it. For the living gods are not what mortals think, and matters that weigh only years to mortals weigh on gods forever, and so that they might know forever their wicked deeds, Azora changed the Chimer into Dunmer, and their skin turned ashen and their eyes into fire. Let this mark remind you of your true selves, who, like ghouls, fed on the nobility, heroism, and trust of their king. Damn, that's a cold line. I mean, they did just betray and murder their leader. All for power, too. Pretty evil thing to do. I wonder what their perspective really is. Like, didn't they love their king? Like, one of his betrayers was his wife, and they killed him with poison? So did they pre-plan this, or did it just kind of happen? And then the tribunal went into Red Mountain and met with Dagoth. Dagoth saw what had been done, for his skin had changed as well, and he tried to avenge the death of Nerevar, but to no avail. He was driven off and thought dead. The tribunal found the tools he had been guarding, and through study of Kagranak's methods, turned themselves into gods. Thousands of years after their apotheosis, the tribunal are still the gods of Morrowind, and the old ways of worship are remembered only by a few, and the murder of Nerevar is known to fewer. But his queen and generals still fear his return, for the words of Azora linger long, and they see the mark of her curse on their people every day. This version was a lot better and seemed to account for more than just Vivek's version, even though Vivek is one of the 3 tribunals, and this is the tribunal version. In the Grand Collection, these are the 2 big books that cover the events and the change from Chimer to Dark Elf. Others mention them, but not necessarily about them. However, I did find a book called The Art of War Magic, which seemed much like an Elder Scrolls version of The Art of War, and my girlfriend did just buy me this, so I thought it would be fun to read this as well. This one was written by Zurin Arctis, Just a brief lesson on Zurin. He is, or was, a Breton, and by some accounts is, or was, the greatest mage to ever exist in the world. Even many rumors surround him becoming the first Lich. This character really does deserve his own video, but as Chimer are the focus here, I will leave his tale at that. The moment to prepare your offense is the moment the enemy becomes vulnerable to attack. Knowledge of the enemy mage's mind is of the foremost importance. Once you know his mind, you will know his weakness. There's a lot more here, but it's not really lore relevant. Now, the last book I wanted to go over is the book Daedra Worship, the Chimer, by the author Phrastus of Elenhir. He is quite known for his book on the Daedra. The history of Daedra worship by the elves, once known as the Chimer, provides a valuable object lesson in the dangers of traffic with the so-called Lords of Oblivion. It is a tale of peril that modern-day apologists for Daedric worship, such as Lady Cinnabar, would do well to heed. Let's begin with a few facts that not even the shrew of Tanith could deny. The Aedra, the gods and the divines, created Nirn out of the chaos of oblivion. They assumed physical form within the mortal plane, the Mundus, and according to elven myth, were the direct ancestors of the Aldmeri, the High Elves. The Aedra were the natural objects of holy reverence for the elves of the Dawn era, and the first organized religions venerated these divines. However, after Nirn was born, the Aedra withdrew from their creation, becoming distant, aloof, disinterested in the affairs of the mortals. But beyond the Mundus, in the infinite variation of oblivion, there were other godlike entities of great power known as the Daedra, literally the not Aedra, who began to take a malign interest in the realm of the Aedra had created. Some of the more powerful of these entities, the so-called Daedric princes, who ruled entire oblivion planes of their own, were nonetheless jealous of the mortals of Nirn, for they had inherited the Aedric capacity of creation. This ability was beyond the Daedra, who, though masters of change and metamorphosis, create nothing new that has not been before. However, one quality the Daedric princes shared with the young mortals of Nirn was a lust for power in all its forms. This corrupting desire is the foundation of all mortal worship of the Daedra. The princes offer power in return for service and worship. Most often, this power comes in the form of knowledge, the most seductive and least perilous seeming of the Daedric temptations. To show how seductive this temptation can be, reflect upon the early Aldemir of Somerset. Though in their arrogance they considered themselves the lineal descendants of the Aedra, nonetheless, the first large-scale religious sect espousing Daedra worship was born in the heart of Somerset itself. There, in the rainbow shadow of the Crystal Tower, the so-called Prophet Veloth communed with the Daedric prince, Beothea, and agreed to accept her gifts. He inscribed the Velothi prophecies, which expounded the doctrine of worship of the good Daedra, Beothea, Azora, and Methala, along with ways to propitiate and negotiate with the bad Daedra, Molag Bal, Malakath, Sheogorath. To the more foolish of the Somersets, Aldmeri, the arts and skills of the good Daedra offered to teach them seemed more useful than the maxims and platitudes of the priests of the Aedra, and a number of elven clans accepted Veloth as their prophet and guide. When the Sapiarchs of Alinor rightfully prohibited this schism, Veloth led the clans loyal to him out of the Isles, across the sea to the far side of Tamriel, where they colonized the domain now known as Morrowind. The followers of Saint Veloth, who became known as the Chimer, were willing to trade the paradise of Golden Somerset for the purgatory of Ashen Morrowind, all in return for the illusionary gifts of the Daedra. The Chimer built mighty temples to Boethia, Azora, and Mephala, and established the traditions of worship in Morrowind that were later co-opted by the Tribunal. As even the beginning student of history knows, this large-scale dabbling with Daedra led inevitably to warfare and catastrophe. Chimer civilization fell at the Battle of Red Mountain, and the curse of Azora, their erstwhile mistress, transformed the brilliant Chimer into the sullen and haunted Dwemer. After that time, Morrowind, under the Tribunal, turned its back on worship of the Daedra, but by then, the damage had been done. Today, the Daedra are feared and abhorred across the length and breadth of Tamriel, and rightfully so. Yet, despite the clear lessons of history, some misguided souls still insist that traffic with Daedra lords can be tolerated, even accepted. To those such as you, Lady Cinnabar, I say, beware. What pact with the Daedra ever ended well? This was much more of a quick history of the Chimer and how trusting Daedra always leads to ruin, which, well, judging by the evidence that we have, I can't really disagree. Yet, it is worth noting that Velothi culture was drastically different from the rest of Chimer culture. This author seems to really hate Daedra, but I mean, can we really blame him? So to recap, he tells us about how Velothi became a prophet and led a bunch of elves away from high elf culture and began to worship Daedra. They were the Chimer, then when they pissed off Azora, she made them all Dwemer, or dark elves. Now they seem to worship the god kings, like Vivek and Sotha, because the third one died. Anyway, that was all I wanted to cover today. Thank you for watching, and YouTube thinks you will like one of these videos on screen now. Okay, bye.